Greetings. Just some thoughts, some points. We are building our toolbox to consider what is happening in our country, how we can reestablish our values as our fundamental basis for our decisions, our concepts, what we support or what we don't support. We're considering, we're discussing, we're reminding ourselves that words and definitions have meaning. We're going to challenge those who appropriate terms and words. We're also going to simply, because this isn't always either or, we're going to simply challenge in the good way. Okay, support it. I'm not going to believe you just because you're a woman, unless you can prove to me that women never lie. Since women do lie, because they're human beings, then I can't simply accept that anything a woman says is true. So stop with all that, support what you're saying, and let's go from there. We have all of that. We're also considering our sources, being better at challenging our sources, questioning our sources, not simply blindly accepting what our sources have said, because it sounds like we want to believe what we want to believe. Well, okay, no. Challenge it, question it. If it's true, the proof will be in the description. If it's not true, you'll begin to think or see or recognize, that part is good, supported, solid. This part, you just took something that was solid and you turned it into something that is not solid. That's actually, I don't want to be there. I want you to support it. So we have those elements. Here's another thought. As we've looked at the constitutional structure and basis of our government in the United States, and how power and authority are delegated, and responsibility are delegated to the various parts of government, Congress, the legislative, the president, the executive, the Supreme Court, and other courts, the judicial. We also understand that powers that are not specifically delegated to the federal government don't belong there. They are either with the states or aren't even with the states, they're with the people. Couple of thoughts just to expand our concepts and expand our understanding is that the Supreme Court, for being the Supreme Court, is not always right. The Supreme Court sometimes engages in practices that are either questionable or later another different Supreme Court will say, that was a bad decision. We've had those throughout American history. The most jarring examples go back to the Dred Scott decision of 1857, in which the Supreme Court somehow decided that a slave who was taken to free state of Illinois was somehow not entitled to then be free because the slave wasn't a person. Okay, so the Supreme Court decided that a person wasn't a person. Just don't even go any further than that. In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, that Supreme Court decided that the United States Constitution, which guarantees rights to every single person, somehow also guaranteed or supported that rights were conditional based on race, an immutable characteristic. They had still not worked through that writes regarding women. They still haven't worked through that. But this was men, just even staying with men. In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, they said segregation was still constitutional. It took till 1954 in the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education decision that the Supreme Court reversed that and said, no, rights are not limited or segregated by characteristics, immutable characteristics of race. No. An American is an American is an American is an American. Doesn't matter what your race is. 1970, we've just recently had a decision by the Supreme Court which has restored an understanding of what the court's role is. That's a little bit different than what I was just referencing, but we're looking at the courts and the Supreme Court. We just had a reversal of Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade, for those who don't know, it was a decision reached in 1973 by the Supreme Court that declared that there was a constitutional right to abortion. For those, if you should happen to be a liberal progressive Democrat, you're probably not watching this anyway. But if you're a liberal progressive, if you vote Democrat, and you have a mind that's open and is thinking, you will still need to hear these things. First, what you all value is race. 8 out of the 9 justices were white, or as you all do, white adjacent or white something to somehow include Jews in that. Because you liberal progressive Democrats are about characteristics, you will need to hear that 9 out of the 9 justices on that court were all men. Not wanting to be men, not transitioning, they were men. And they found in the Constitution a right to abortion. Yes, let it blow your minds. Let it blow your minds that these white men found the right to abortion. But here we are in 2022, 23 now, where the Supreme Court, made up of different people, all justices, the majority of whom said, if it's not in the Constitution, you can't impose it on the Constitution. You can't manipulate it in. The federal government does not have the right to do that because it's not specifically spelled out that right or authority, it resides with the federal government, which means it resides with the states. Furthermore, this court found that the court cannot impose a standard or a decision or create a right that is not in the Constitution. Now, there are many, 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 many people who have lost their minds about this because it's a right. Well, it's not a right. They declared it. They found it. They proclaimed it. It wasn't there. So, this court has found that the authority resides with the states, not the courts imposing it upon the whole country. If you believe the right belongs in the Constitution or that it is a constitutional right, put it in the Constitution. And how do you do that? Congress passes the law that the president, the executive, signs that then goes to this 50 states, 2/3 of whom have to approve that. And if they do, then it is added to the Constitution. It is an amendment. If your point, if your view, if what you value is not worthy of that, then it's not worthy. Get away from me. Just get out of here. If it's worthy, bring it on. Make it happen. We have done this in our country. We, following that process, imposed a restriction on the sale and I think possession of alcohol, except for religious purposes. But there was prohibition. That was the will of the large majority of Americans across the country. That's how you do it. Of course, with the prohibition, then that was reversed. But how was it reversed? Same process. Congress passed, President signed, and then the individual states debated, discussed, considered, and individually ratified that law, which ultimately became the 21st Amendment, which reversed the 19th Amendment of Prohibition. Excuse me, I believe it was the 19th. Maybe it was the 18th. Forgotten that. Maybe it was the 19th and 22nd. Anyway, the reversal was constitutional. Courts don't have to decide it. Courts don't have to find it. You believe in it, you do the work. And if it's 2/3 of the majority across the country, red states, blue states, urban areas, rural areas, suburban areas, north, south, east, west, flatland, mountains, you do the work. And if it's good, it will be. Or even in the case of, you might not call it good or bad, but it might be this is what people believe. Believe alcohol is insidious and undermining families and safety and children protection and security. There were a lot of motivations for it. It is an expression of the will of the people, or it was, and these things can be that way again. We will not take shortcuts. We will not impose through executive action and say that's legitimate. Joe Biden, student loan forgiveness. Get out of here. You don't have the authority to do that. That's money that Congress, our elected legislators, have to decide. The president does not decide that. You believe in abortion, and abortion should be a national. Okay, make it happen. Make it happen. Don't expect the court to narrowly impose it upon everybody. Don't do that. Don't do that. If your cause is good, you do the work, and it will be what we have grounded in authoritative, affirmatively declared position and belief. This is what we want as a country. Even for things that we don't necessarily individually agree with or support, this is still where we want to be. We want the people to decide these things, not a handful of white or white adjacent, mostly white, sort of white men. See, I'm blowing your Democratic, liberal, progressive minds because these were white men who imposed abortion across this country. Join us in the 2023, where we don't go by characteristics. We go by minds, thoughts, and values. Son of Liberty 2020, amliberty2020 at gmail.com. Even the courts, the third equal branch of government, has been wrong before, has had to reverse course before, has had to change decisions made by previous courts before. We are responsible for making this country what we want it to be. Let's go.